Good morning. Good morning and welcome to this keynote session of the new EventWell Talks. I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Baggs this morning from Soaring Worldwide PR. Although a slight change there, Adam, which we're going to be chatting about, aren't we? Me and Adam
absolutely.
How long have we known each other now, Adam?
Probably something like 15 years, I would think, when I first started working with the Barbican.
Yes, when we were both fresh-faced, young, eager, all that kind of stuff, huh?
You may have been fresh-faced. I'm not so sure I was, but thank you for that. So yeah.
I seem to remember a fresh-faced Adam Baggs coming and working at the Barbican with us. No, it's a pleasure, Adam, for you to join us today. Very similar to me, very, very passionate about mental health and well-being in our industry, which is what we're going to be talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Chatting about hypnotherapy.
Yes,
which
indeed.
For the guys that are listening, probably the immediate thing that comes to mind when you think about hypnotherapy is people on stage being sent to sleep or doing chicken impressions. So if you're a bit of a Darren Brown type fan, or people using it as a therapy for quitting smoking is probably the most famous of hypnotherapy treatments. But Adam, from your perspective, when and where did you first hear about hypnotherapy?
It's funny you should actually mention the smoking, because that's actually where it first came about. Not because I was a smoker, but my father was a smoker when I was very small, and he stopped smoking and significantly reduced drinking through hypnosis using a lovely local hypnotherapist called Jerry. And I think I was about probably 5-6 years old, maybe a little bit older at the time when I first came across hypnotherapy. I think it's a shame, though, what you're saying a minute ago, mental health issues. And I think it's back then it was a bit of a taboo subject in many ways, mental health issues. And he, for example, suffered a huge amount of stress, which sadly meant he passed away when he was in his early 50s. So for me, it's a big part of that is helping people with stress and worries and that kind of thing. It's quite interesting at the moment through the work I'm doing. Probably 90% of my clients are women, and I think it's really still taboo, particularly amongst guys, to step forward, recognize they've got anxieties and that kind of thing. And though I work with people of all genders, I'm particularly keen to work with guys, because suicide does remain sort of one of the biggest killers of men my age, and I'd really like to help alleviate that.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Like you say, it always has been a worrying concern in terms of male statistics and mental health, and particularly from it's not just suicide figures, but also heart disease is very much linked to that, isn't it? Because obviously prolonged stress over long periods puts tremendous amount of strain on your heart and circulatory system, and that's why, from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, we actually talk about heart disease and heart rates as well as death by suicide, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I was just going to say, the link between the mind and the body is just so incredible in terms of those stress levels and the ongoing impact it can have.
Yeah. They do actually say, just an interesting fact for people listening, they do actually say that you have 3 minds in your body. So you have your brain, and your heart, and your stomach, because you'll find neurons in all 3 of those areas. So that's why there's a distinct link between your mind and your heart, that whole listen to your heart kind of stuff, and also your gut, trust your gut. So it's where statements such as that come from. So think about that. Yeah,
funnily enough, I'll be talking about the 2 different minds we have inside our brain actually in a bit, when I get onto my little section about polar bears. So maybe even a 4th one there. So yeah,
absolutely. I'm intrigued now. Polar bears. You didn't mention polar bears in there. No. So from a hypnotherapy perspective, how have you used it to support yourself then?
Well, for me, my first experience, actually, Dad tried to get me to along to his hypnotherapist to stop biting my nails when I was about 8 years old. But the first experience I can properly remember was when I saw a hypnotherapist over in this part of the world in Cirencester, when I was scared of getting a general anaesthetic. At the time, I was into paragliding, kite surfing, whitewater canoeing, a whole bunch of dangerous sports. General anaesthetic, though, utterly terrified me. And she just helped me with a really useful technique to just calm myself, calm my mind. And it really got me through it. And after that, I returned to see her. Her name's Nicola. I returned to see Nicola regularly for a whole host of issues, usually stress related, because I'm one of those people who tends to say yes to anything, but then tend to prioritize the wrong ones sometimes. So it can leave me quite stressed and that kind of thing. And she's helped me focus on that, focus on the right things. And I can genuinely say my PR business has kind of been significantly more successful over the years because of her influence and because of what she's done to help me. And I think one of the things she's helped me realize is just how important the therapist-client relationship is as well. There was one point, I don't really remember why I did it, but I saw another hypnotherapist around here. Maybe she wasn't available or something. It was only for a couple of sessions, but it just didn't work. She kind of gets me, and some of it's clearly her sort of superb people skills, and that's a real part of her talent, but also historically she worked in marketing and ran a business, and so she kind of gets some of the things that I've experienced and that kind of thing. And sort of, I suppose likewise for me, it's why I'm finding it so fulfilling working with people, event profs, people in this industry. I've worked in this industry for years, and I get their pressure points. I understand the language where they're using and all that kind of thing, and the challenges. So that's where it's really, really effective, and I'm really looking forward to working with more people.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that, your experience in the industry?
Yeah, I've never done anything else other than work in this industry, to be honest. It's a little known fact amongst a lot of my industry friends and that kind of thing. My first ever job was working for an AV firm as a techie. And I kind of just fell into the industry like so many others did. I spent a while when I was very young working at what was TMO, is now BI, in Newport Pagnell. I was lucky enough to work indirectly for the late, great David Hackett, who was an incredible influence, and then worked with Jill Hawkins, who now runs Aniseed PR. And whilst working with her, I kind of found my niche, and I've spent 18 years now, I think it is, worryingly, working as a PR in the industry, running an agency with a handful of clients, particularly those wanting to kind of get to event buyers, and the association sector is another area I've got a real sort of niche in that. And I love it. I just love this industry and couldn't think of really working in any other industry. So when I decided on the hypnotherapy angle, whilst I will be working outside the industry, that was really, really important to me.
Yeah. So why the change?
As hopefully has come across, I'm really passionate about the hypnotherapy, and I've been considering this sort of becoming a hypnotherapist. And that probably for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing all the background reading and the research and that kind of thing. But it was the first lockdown that gave me, I guess, the time and the opportunity to kind of move things on and focus on it. I didn't really know how much of a change it represents yet. Kind of initially, I thought it'd be a bit of a bonus income, something to keep me going and that kind of thing. And I'd focus on the PR. But as the impact of COVID and the pandemic continues, the PR work has kind of lessened. So, and people on the flip side have become incredibly focused on their mental health issues, I think, over the lockdowns and that kind of thing. So, people are making different choices, whether through necessity or just a desire to improve and that kind of thing. So it represents a time when I can really focus on something where I feel I'm doing something really positive and really good. So many of the people I've been talking to, anxiety, stress are on the rise, that kind of thing. People are looking to use this time to lose weight, be healthier. And quite a lot of people have also looking to stop smoking, which you mentioned earlier. And, for someone who's a 20-a-day smoker, maybe, the cost of hypnotherapy is about 2 weeks worth of fags, basically. So, I've worked with several people already to stop them, and with people losing jobs and redundancies, the financial impact just of stopping smoking is huge.
Massive. I'm an ex-smoker. I remember the cost.
Yes. Can it has a big impact on mental health, but also a massive impact on people's wallets. So why not?
Yeah, of course. So is amazing. Is hypnotherapy then your long-term future, do you think?
I haven't kind of really, it's a part of my long-term future, absolutely. How much is sort of yet to be determined. I guess we've got to see what the future holds really in terms of the pandemic and the industry. I mean, I know, there's a huge amount of positive thought over the last few days within the industry, what with the sort of the reopening and increase in when we can have events and that kind of thing, and the most recent announcement for the government and that kind of thing. But there's still going to be some time before that kicks in and that. So, as I say, see what the future holds. I imagine there'll be a good balance between that and the PR work.
Yeah. So share with us then from a treatment perspective, how does it help and what can it help with? Putting impressions and the falling asleep and
yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, it's probably I kind of, when we talked about this session, I kind of was splitting into two halves. Kind of the one part which was just us, or sort of us interviewing and having a chat and that, but then the other half is me, a little bit more of almost a presentation, talking a little bit about the brain and how anxiety impacts on the brain and that kind of thing. And maybe I'll sort of move on to that a little bit now.
I'm keen to hear about the polar bears.
Yeah, I will get to the polar bears in a minute. Don't worry about that. No problem. It's a huge question as to what hypnotherapy can help with, because it's massive. As you said earlier, smoking and phobias are what it's well known for, but also weight loss, pain management. It is recognized as a really key cure for IBS. Anxiety, stress, anger, depression, they're all areas that kind of, I work on and that kind of thing with clients. So I'm just going to jump into and just chat through a few thoughts on that. And for the sake of kind of talking about how the brain works and how depression and anxiety, etc., are created, I'm going to assume for the sake of this session that pretty much everyone listening and as a part of this conversation will have at some point experienced anxiety or stress in their lives. If not, obviously you're very lucky, but I suspect most people will have experienced even a couple of moments of anxiety or stress. As I say, if they haven't, they're going to know, you're all going to know someone who has. And I'm going to use anxiety and stress as an example, partly because they're more likely that everyone's aware of them, and because of what's been going on with the pandemic. Christmas is coming up and that kind of thing. So I'll try and keep it as relevant to everyone as I can. But if anyone wants a sort of more focused and specific chat, then please do get in touch. I'm going to share my screen a little bit during some of this, just to include a couple of examples, and you'll discover why during this I decided to focus on hypnotherapy instead of becoming an artist in my spare time. So if we, hopefully you can see this image. And if we have a look at the brain and think about the brain, it's kind of the bit that as your conscious part, sort of the part that interacts with the world. And it's the part we use to be aware of all our interactions together. And it's attached to a big intellectual resource, kind of see if my pen's working. Bear with me 1 second. Technology issue here. Sorry about this. My iPad stopped sharing. See that? Right, there we go, back. So we have this vast intellectual resource, which is what we consider to be our intellectual mind. And it's the part we kind of don't share with other animals. It's what makes us great conference and event managers, part of the winning venue sales team, AV technicians, destination experts, all that sort of thing. And when we operate from this part of the brain, this intellectual mind, we get things right in life. It comes up with a proper assessment of the situation. It's fairly positive, or it's always, it's a positive part of the brain. But there's another part of brain, which is the kind of the original primitive part. And a key influential part of that is the amygdala. And it's often referred to as the fight, flight, depression part of the brain. And it's associated with a couple of other primitive parts. The hippocampus, almost worth thinking about. It's a bit like a filing cabinet in the brain. And the hypothalamus, and that's like the pharmacist. That regulates our chemical responses to things. So here you go, Helen. Let's imagine a polar bear suddenly appears when we leave this session and we all walk out to go and get our cup of coffee. What's going to happen? Our anxiety is going to go up. You're going to lose the intellectual control up here and move from that part of the brain, the intellectual brain, down into this part of the brain, the primitive brain. You might go sweaty. It's going to increase your heartbeat, the stomach will churn, and you'll be off like a shot probably. And this is where IBS is one of the things hypnotherapy can help with, because IBS is a key part of that primal need to kind of empty the body, make ourselves as light as possible, and get out of there. And that's an entirely appropriate response to want to run away from a polar bear. Unfortunately, it can be. I'm going to stop sharing that for the moment. So unfortunately, it's kind of the same in life. When our anxiety goes up, and it can be gradual, we start to lose that intellectual control. And to a greater or lesser extent, the primitive mind takes over. And the primitive mind tends to work within the parameters of depression, anxiety, and anger. So if our primitive mind thinks, for example, that our life is in a crisis or emergency, it's going to step in and help. Depression, anxiety, and anger are all primitive opt-out clauses, and that's kind of highly relevant to what's been happening to a lot of people during the pandemic, and with a lot of the challenges we've all been seeing. So if we kind of think back to the midst of time when a caveman looked out of the cave, for example, and there might be snow or ice and danger, and he couldn't go out to hunt, pull a rug over their head and don't interact until the situation's changed, basically. We've kind of adapted that to modern day symptoms of depression, for example. And anger, on the other hand, is sort of the primitive way of increasing our strength to defend ourselves against wild animals, other wild tribesmen, and that kind of thing. But it's worth bearing in mind that that primitive mind it's a negative mind, and it's always going to see things from the worst possible perspective, which is sensible for our self-preservation. That's kind of the right thing, because when you run into a polar bear, you don't want to think it's eaten, it wants a cuddle, look how soft and furry it is. It's, quite rightly, we want our brains to say it's going to snaffle us, it wants to eat us, and we need to get out of here. And that response is great when we run into a polar bear, but it's not ideal when we're trying to deal with a stroppy delegate or plan a socially distant event in a global pandemic, deal with the redundancies that so many people in our industry are unfortunately facing. And it's obsessional. So if there's a polar bear in the back garden, you're going to be, that's my back garden over there, you're going to be looking, keeping an eye out for the back garden. You're going to keep keeping on checking and that kind of thing. And it's vigilant. So if the perception is that danger's around, then it's sensible to stay on red alert. And in many ways, this is, the constant state of readiness an event manager is going to find themselves in during any given event. They're always looking out for the next thing that can go wrong, thinking ahead, how can they fix it, and that kind of thing, which is what makes you guys fantastic event managers and that kind of thing. But it doesn't do a lot for the sort of ongoing mental health to be constantly stressed, worried, anxious, looking for issues and that kind of thing. And I guess because the primitive mind isn't an intellect, it can't really innovate. Has to kind of look back to previous patterns of behavior. So if what we did yesterday ensured our survival, encouraged to do it again. If you see a polar bear, you run away and you survive, brain's going to go, that's the correct response. So if having 19 coffees during any event you've worked on to keep you going, works, why shouldn't it work the next time? You can sort of see how it starts to build up and create those pathways and that kind of thing, that the brain thinks certain things are going to help it out, and that happens to us when we're running our events. So how do we create this anxiety, I guess, is something that's worth knowing, because anxiety is ultimately caused by negative thinking. It's not the events in our lives that necessarily cause a perception of crisis, but it's our thought patterns surrounding the events. And every negative thought we have is converted into anxiety. I'm guessing almost anybody looking at this has been worried in advance at some point about maybe a meeting at work, a presentation they've got to deliver, a site inspection with a tough client, a particularly difficult event they've got to deliver. You can create anxiety by negatively forecasting the future. It can be the big things or the little things. And the mind can't necessarily tell the difference between imagination and reality. Intellectually, you know that your site inspection, event, or presentation is going to be okay. You're good at your job, you're going to nail it. But you think about it 49 times in advance. You think about it negatively 49 times in advance. You think about all the things that could go wrong. There's an element of being a good event manager in there, planning for the worst, but you run through that presentation and it all goes wrong 49 times. So you end up attending that presentation or running that event effectively 50 times in your brain. One of them was amazing because you're a fantastic event manager, presenter, whatever, you get it right. But 49 times you've been through an absolute disaster. Conversely, even after the event's been a success, you look back, or that presentation, you look back, and instead of focusing on how well it went, our inclination so often is to focus on the 5% that maybe didn't work, or the 2% that didn't work, or the one thing you forgot to say that nobody aside from you actually realized, and that kind of thing. You've won the business, the event's gone amazingly, but instead we focus on the negative. And each one of those negative thoughts we have is accumulated and stored up. And we say it's stored in a stress bucket, which I'll draw a picture of in a minute, another one of my wonderful drawings. Effectively, we have a method of emptying our stress buckets. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to bring this up. Share my screen again. So cool. Hope you see that. So if you imagine a stress bucket, as I say, you can tell it's a bucket. It's got a tap on it there. It's good to have a little bit of stress in your bucket. That's what gets you up in the morning. That's what keeps us on our game when we're organizing our events and that kind of thing. But too much stress increases and increases and eventually explodes out the top. And that's when we have maybe a panic attack or a little bit of a meltdown, or feel totally overwhelmed when all this stress is flowing over the top and that kind of thing. And funnily enough, it can often be the smallest things that actually push us over the edge. The big things build up at the bottom and that kind of thing. I always remember a few years ago, I was pulling together a proposal for someone, and back in the days when I used paper copies of anything instead of digital, I was trying to hole punch this proposal, and the hole punch stopped working, and I absolutely lost it. I totally killed the hole punch. It ended up in several pieces. It was the hole punch that pushed me over the edge. Thankfully, we do have a method of emptying our stress bucket, which is REM sleep. Kind of at night, we rerun the events of the day and we change them from an emotional memory to a narrative memory. So a memory we have control over effectively. And most people will be familiar with how REM works. Someone upsets you in the afternoon, you're working on an event and a delegate makes some comment, drives you up the wall, or the client says something, and you go home and you tell your other half about it, or your friends or your colleagues, and they say forget about it, but you can't. It's niggling at you. You think about when you go to bed. During REM sleep, you'll rerun that, what happened, either in a clear or a metaphorical way, dreaming, and you move it from the primitive brain to the intellectual brain, where you've kind of got control over it. So when you wake up in the morning, you're going to have forgotten about the person that upset you. And even if you haven't, you'll be going, why do I let these people upset me? I like to imagine I wake up every morning with my stress bucket empty, so I can start the day without anxiety or anger, etc. But unfortunately, not everyone does, which is when things overflow. And that's can be for a couple of reasons, because REM is probably restricted to about 20% of our sleep. So if we do try and overdo it, then the mind actually will wake us up. And when your mind's waking up, because you wake up kind of wide awake in the night and feel a bit miserable, can't get back to sleep, can't stop thinking about it. If you're a parent, you'll know the difference between that and kind of maybe being woken up by a baby, where you get woken up, deal with the child, and go straight back to sleep. Or indeed, we've all had that experience where we wake up needing a pee in the night and we go straight back to sleep. This other kind of waking up is where we mull things over and just really struggle, and we get into this vicious circle. So the more we have in our bucket, the more time we spend in the primitive brain, the more we're encouraged to be negative, the more we've got to get out of the mind and that kind of thing. So the key thing really is to get back on things, and is to try and reduce and restrict the amount we're piling into our bucket. And we know when we're succeeding because that sleep improves. It's also worth noting, I get actually on the opposite side, is that using REM to diffuse anxiety can be quite hard work. And it's why some people get almost exhausted by sleep and are encouraged to sleep even more. And they end up in a different sort of vicious circle. And this is, that ongoing need to sleep because the REM is so exhausting is quite often a symptom of depression that many people suffer, that real challenge to get up and that kind of thing. And hypnotherapy is essentially a tool to help people reduce those levels of anxiety and kind of, I guess, get the real them back. So by entering a state of trance, we're helping to get the client to move thoughts from the primitive mind to the intellectual mind, to take intellectual control over those challenges and anxieties, much like REM does for them. So just before we go on to any questions anybody might have, just to touch on a couple of the bits of neuroscience, really. Sort of early man and woman were given real rewards for carrying out certain evolutionary processes. They got a reward when they hunted and gathered and supported themselves and their families. We're better as a tribe rather than we are as individuals. And they got rewarded when they interacted with each other. They felt motivated. It was a coping mechanism. It helped them cope with day-to-day activities, cope with physical fear and all that sort of thing. And we know what the reward is. It's a chemical response in the brain that produces neurotransmitters that act as catalysts for really lovely mentally healthy behavior. And the one we talk about most is serotonin. And when we're producing a flow of serotonin, we are nice, we're happy, we're coping, brave little people. And we need to operate within those positive parameters, much like early man did. And we don't go out to hunt, but we do have to interact in a positive way with people, think in a positive way, and act in a positive way, take positive actions effectively. I talk about this quite a lot with my clients, sort of the 3 Ps: positive action, interaction, and positive thought. It's quite interesting to know what stops the flow of serotonin. Let me just make some space on the page here, just quickly. So if we think, basically when we're, when we're down in the miserable end, we're not producing much serotonin. We're down at the depressed end down here. And we're not producing the right chemicals effectively. And when we're in the anxious end, right up here, we've got an overload of adrenaline and stress hormones and that kind of thing. But when we're producing a really nice balanced amount of serotonin, we sit here, we're in balance, we're in control, everything is good. And, that's fantastic. When we're up here, that's okay if we run into a polar bear, but it's not so good for our daily lives running events. And we want to get back into this bit here, which is where positive action, positive interaction, and positive thought can help, particularly when combined with some hypnotherapy. From the point of view of what I talk about, solution-focused hypnotherapy, they all work wonderfully together. So I appreciate there was quite a bit of information there in quite a short space of time. I'm happy to chat personally if people would like to know more, or indeed, I think we've got potentially the opportunity to have some questions asked, haven't we, Helen?
We have indeed. What a wowzer! What a fabulous session! So much information, and do you know what? I could sit there and listen to that all day, kind of stuff. I love biology and the way the mind works and the science. I love the science behind all of this. I absolutely love it. So I've been glued.
So you see what I meant when you started by saying we've got 3 minds. I actually added a 4th one in there with us having 2 minds up the top there.
Yeah, absolutely. So fascinating. We've got one question at the moment. We're going to have questions now, guys. So anybody in the audience, if you can pop your questions into the Q&A there, and Adam will be more than happy to help and answer those for you. One question that we've got in there at the moment is what you obviously have clients that you're working with at the moment.
Yeah.
And without going into personal details.
Yeah, of course.
What kinds of things are you finding people are asking for at the moment for support with?
Anxiety is not necessarily the top thing people are saying to me when they start a session and start talking to me, but it is so often the root cause of what's happening. I've got someone I'm working with on weight loss, for example, and actually, when you get down to it and have a conversation with him and that kind of thing, the weight gain has been through stress and that, and he was stuck in a hotel for 3 weeks in the first lockdown doing nothing but Deliveroo, and then never having time to plan food and that kind of thing, stopping at garages. The easy option was to pop to McDonald's and that kind of thing. So although it was weight loss in the client's mind, actually when it turned out it's actually not weight loss, it's there's stress underneath it. And so many people are facing real challenges because of COVID. One client I was talking to felt she'd got a little bit of a drinking issue going on during the first lockdown. We've done some fantastic work together, and at one point, and as part of the process, I kind of asked clients to tell me how they're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a bit more complicated than that, but for the sake of this, for simplicity, 3 or 4 weeks ago, she was at a 10. Things have gone fantastically. But then just a week ago, unfortunately, a very close friend of hers had passed away due to COVID within 3 days. Just, had been fine, went for a drink. He was shielding. It was the only time he'd gone out the house pretty much during this whole pandemic, got COVID, passed 3 days later. So she, dropped right down again. So very personal that to her, and very challenging for her and that kind of thing. But yeah, anxiety, stress, and that are probably the biggest issues I'm seeing.
Yeah. And it is like you say, I think sometimes the stress and anxiety is an underlying issue for an awful lot of challenges and stuff, isn't it? And it is like you say, it's people recognizing what stress is. People recognize it. You said it the first there, didn't you? Kind of stuff. It's recognizing what anxiety actually is. So I suppose we've got a couple of more questions that are coming as well. So it's somebody's asked here. So what is the youngest age that hypnotherapy can work on? And children with mental health issues due to lockdown, for example, we're both parents, so we both understand this completely. Could it benefit them? Would they understand?
Yes is the short answer. They will understand. What I've just talked through can be significantly simplified for kids and that kind of thing. The relaxation elements, they will get a huge amount of benefit from. I mean, I've even my lad Tristan, I've used some of haven't gone through all the neuroscience element and that with him, but if he's having a bad night's sleep or that kind of thing, he was poorly a few weeks ago and that kind of thing, struggling to sleep, running through some of the actual hypnotherapy and relaxation works with him. I've just done a few phobia sessions with a 12-year-old who's scared of spiders. That worked really, really successfully. You can work with younger kids. I think quite often it is down to the individual child and that kind of thing, and also the positive influence that the parents have on the children about the whole process and that kind of thing. But yeah, certainly can work with children.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you probably agree as well. Kind of even just having conversations with your children about mental health and emotions and all of that, because they get it, don't they? They understand.
Yeah, and they get it, and they can see it in their parents and that kind of thing, and see when it negatively affects them. And you can see when mummy or daddy are stressed and that kind of thing, and and they won't use the language we use about it, but they still can feel that way and that kind of thing. And some of the isolation they've experienced particularly can be quite tough on them. We're a pack animal, we're tribal, we love being together and interacting with people and that. And as grown-ups, we can, it's tough for us as grown-ups, but we can intellectually see the benefits of self-isolation and and social distancing. We can see and get how the maths works and that kind of thing. It's a lot harder to for an 8 or 9-year-old child to get that, to be honest, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that any kind of talking, sharing, all that kind of thing is really important.
Yeah.
Another question we've got is that how long does hypnotherapy usually take to become effective? Or is something that people will need to come back to occasionally?
That's how long is a piece of string type question. But in general terms, it can be very effective very quickly at starting to make an impact. So 2 or 3 sessions, people will start to see positive benefit. Even 1 session, they'll see positive benefit. Generally would work with clients somewhere 8 to a dozen sort of consecutive sessions, probably the first 8 maybe a weekly, and then it might get a little bit further apart and that kind of thing. Smoking is actually done in 1 session, 1 long session. So that's a very interesting process. I've over the last couple of weeks, I've stopped 2 people smoking, and I've found it incredibly powerful. But yeah, it's hard to believe unless you go through it. But yeah, 1 session will work for that. But long-term wise, as I say, I mean, I've worked with the same hypnotherapist for 15 years, and we almost have a quarterly top-up session because she just helps me focus what I want and that kind of thing. One of the parts of the hypnotherapy process is there's the element of it that's talking therapy, psychotherapy, and there's the hypnotherapy element, and they work hand in hand, and you use the talking element to get someone in a good place to have the hypnotherapy succeed and benefit for them. So that's one of the reasons I have those regular sessions, is it just helps me get back on the right track and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
what kind of I'm interested now, what kind of feedback you get from your clients in terms of if you've really helped someone with a phobia and anxiety to quit, what kind of things do people say to you?
Oh, it is just incredible, some of it. The funniest one I got was one of the people who stopped smoking did say to me, she said, "I now no longer want to kill people when I don't have a cigarette," which I quite liked. Because she saw it as every time before when she'd stopped smoking as being really, really an angsty thing and that kind of thing, whereas this time it's all good and it's a much more positive process. I love just people coming to the session saying things like, wow, it's really working, I can see the real benefit. But what's really nice is when I see the other benefits. So someone I've been working on came initially about weight loss, moved on to anxiety, but in each session I've just been hearing about how their business is improving and improving and improving. And it's kind of, you can just hear each week there's something better, something new going on, and that's really, really lovely to hear and that kind of thing. So yeah, it is great to get that positive feedback, and people just at the end of each session just kind of, it's quite funny, they're all sort of a bit bleary-eyed and that kind of thing as they come out of the trance and that kind of thing, and you can just see them coming in, shoulders up, tense, and when they leave, it's just like, it's really nice.
This would be so rewarding, so rewarding. So a couple more questions. So you've said the therapist-client relationship is key. How would someone find the right therapist? How do you know where to look? This might be an opportunity to talk about EventWell Fit.
Yes, yeah. So I think until you've got to know someone, so part of what we do is we get talking to people and that kind of thing, and you understand whether someone's right for you and whether they speak the language that is appropriate to you and sort of get you and that kind of thing. But as you say, I think EventWell Fit is quite a good thing. So one of the things that Helen and the EventWell team are launching is, it's almost like a mental health and a little bit of physical health wellness club, basically, much like you can be a part of another wellness club, etc. You can join up, and on a regular basis, different people Helen's invited to be a part of it are offering things like, I think you've got HIIT sessions, and I know Nicole's doing yoga sessions, and I, for example, am going to be doing some relax sessions. So an opportunity for people to come along and experience an element of the hypnotherapy and kind of see a little bit how it works and that kind of thing. There are obviously, so I think that'll be a really positive way if people want to find out a little bit about me, obviously, and that kind of thing. I think a lot of it, though, is just having that initial conversation, having that initial chat with a therapist and finding out, is this person right for me, and what's what's lovely is, from my point of view, is just kind of get people coming in a bit reticent. Is this hypnotherapy thing really right for me? You know, their initial thing, you said right back at the beginning, is running around on stage like chickens, which by the way, you can't actually make someone do. But
Secret.
it's that kind of, you know, people, as we have that conversation and that kind of thing, and people start nodding along, and you can see them kind of coming on board with the whole concept. That's really, really positive, and I love seeing that with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Which it's got a nice question here as well. Is, do I need to practice what I've learned during hypnotherapy, or will the therapy session just fix me? Interesting.
The therapy session won't just fix you. This is you know, even with the stop smoking one, you know, you've got to have a desire to want to be you can't have someone show up to hypnotherapy session and say, oh, my boyfriend said I've got to come, my girlfriend said I should really come to hypnotherapy. You have to have a desire to be there. One of the things I provide to clients after the initial conversation is effectively an audio download. It's me doing it's a recording of me doing a relaxation session, so the client can kind of get to know my voice, get to know the speech patterns, and practice each night, effectively just listening to it, helping them relax and getting them in the right space. And part of the hypnotherapy practice is, you know, people will come out of each session feeling buoyed, feeling positive, feeling like they've got at least one positive action that they would like to achieve. And, you know, hopefully they'll go away and achieve that. And the more people do that, the better they will be, and that kind of thing. Just coming along, having a session and doing nothing else will undoubtedly relax someone.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're willing to take those extra steps and then come along to another session and another set and that kind of thing, that's where they'll see the real long-term benefits.
Perfect. So where can they find out more details about services?
Find out more about me via my website, adam-bags.com. Sorry, just checking that, just trying to remember if it was .com or .co.uk. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously via EventWell as well, though, and the EventWell Fit class, which is a great opportunity for people to come and see more. I'm on Instagram as well, Facebook, all the usual places. Just look up Adam Bags, you'll find me. One of the advantages of having a fairly unusual surname is I'm fairly easy to find on Google. So yeah, and I'm delighted to chat to anybody who'd like to know more.
Fabulous. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
No problem at all.
Don't have any more questions? No, we don't have any more questions. So absolutely fascinating session, Adam, as I knew it would be. So thank you so much for your time, for sharing, for the thought leadership. It's been absolutely amazing. And like Adam mentioned, do check him out on his website. Check out EventWell Fit on the eventwell.org website as well. Adam's class is on a Wednesday at 7:15. So make sure you check that one out.
I put it at 7:15 as well, because if anybody's interested in doing Nicole's yoga class, I think it starts about 15 minutes after that. Nicole's fabulous, and I thought it might be the perfect thing to follow up her yoga with.
Yes, absolutely. The nice thing about EventWell Fit, guys, is that all of our instructors are all event professionals who have a wellbeing, mental health side hustle and passion there as well. So do take the time to check that out. Check out Nicole's and check out Adam's class. We're going to do, to bring it to a close, we're going to bring a quick poll up, which Arjun will do for us now. We'll bring that poll up and you can all give us your thoughts on the session, how you found that for us. I think that's been done, which brings us to the end of the session. So again, thank you so much, Adam. We're going to take a 15-minute break now before we go into our last session, which is our lockdown 2.0 and what does it mean for events, and our mental health panel with Rita, Charlie and Kate. As before, we do have Tea with Ted happening right now, so over in the tea room. So if you want to switch over to there, you'll find a lovely TED Talk on how your unique story can get you hired with a lady called Amy Eubanks Davis. So head over there and then we'll see you back here in the main room at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alan.